everyone. My name's Sara, Wanous. I work at our headquarters office in San Diego as your membership coordinator here at Citizens Climate Lobby. And it's a real privilege today to get to be here hosting this panel with so many really impressive youth activists today. So before I even introduce them, can we just get one round of applause? All right, so if you could all just wave when I introduce you now. We have Nalleli Cobo, who is a senior at Alverno Heights Academy High School, where she organized her community to help shut down an oil well that was affecting health of local residents. She's also part of a project called People Not Pozos. And then there's Michaela Murphy. She's a USC student, and she's the director of outreach for Trojan Advocates for Political Progress and a senator for her undergraduate student government. She's worked on various campaigns as a field organizer, and she has a special interest in team building, recruitment, and building coalitions. We've got Natalie Rotstein, who's a UCLA student. She's a member of the Sunrise Movement in Los Angeles and helped successfully lobby Congressman Ted Lieu to sign on to the Green New Deal. And last but not least, we have Alec Vandenberg, who's a junior at USC. He's the president of Share a Meal, which is a program to feed the hungry, the director of external affairs for their undergraduate student government, the president of Trojan Advocates for Political Progress, and his focus has been on feeding the homeless and increasing voter turnout and registration. So we truly have a really impressive panel here today. And we're going to be doing some time for questions. I have a couple questions planned for each of them, but we also want to hear any questions that you have for any of them. So we have some student volunteers helping out around the room with note cards. So if you have a question, write it on one of the note cards that either they will give you or that there should be some on your tables, and they'll bring them up to me and we'll get those questions asked for you. But to get us started, I was hoping that each of you could tell us a little bit more about what you wish people knew about being a young activist, in any order. Yeah, go for it.
So I guess one thing that we were talking about earlier that I wish people knew about being a young activist is, especially in climate activism, a lot of the people who are doing this aren't necessarily here because we want to be. I wouldn't be going into politics if there wasn't an existential threat to me continuing to live. And yeah, a lot of people, it's oh wow, you're so passionate about this, you must be really interested in politics. I'm no, I don't want to die. That's one thing.
Just going in order, I guess. All right. I don't like talking like this. Hold on. That's better. Something that I think I wish people knew is that it's really hard. I've been doing my activism since I was 9 years old. Last year, I was invited to 2 proms, and I missed because I know going to a conference is more beneficial to the world. And it's just, I wish people would also educate themselves on the matter, not just depend on us, the youth, to save it. It's never too late or too early to dedicate yourself to create a change in the world, and I wish people would jump on that too. Yeah, that's it.
I think something that is kind of disappointing is a lot of the time we have different organizations and different politicians who both put the onus on the rising generation to fix problems that they created, but we also don't bring in this same rising generation into the kind of upper rungs of these movements and these different programs. We can be more than people who get you coffee in an internship. So offering positions of leadership, because we can be really useful in terms of coalition building, especially young students. You can build high school programs and college programs and have different levels of advocacy there as well. So I think just something that's frustrating is I think there's a lot of responsibility put on us, but similarly that relationship isn't extended back to the students.
So I just recently found out I'm actually not a millennial. I missed that by about 2 years. So good news, I'm not Generation Me, but I am Generation Z. And that comes with a lot of perceptions and stigma. You know, we're the generation that uses our phones from the bathrooms to the crosswalks. We're the generations that not going to get a job because of our majors in college. And so I think that we need to kind of break down generational barriers and really make sure that we have, you know, accessible outreach, and really making sure that it's not just using jargon, but it's making sure our language is accessible and inclusive of students, while making sure to not undersell us. And the second thing I would talk about is also just making sure that we're all aware that, especially across generations, we have different methods of advocacy, different methods of activism and advocacy. So it's really making sure that we accept a lot of those different means, whether that's protesting and marches, whether that's viral videos, whether that's social media, or whether that's more conventional strategies like calling members of Congress. So there's a wide diversity, not only in terms of the peoples in the movement, but also the ideas and the actions that everyone takes.
All right, thank you. And given all of your diverse backgrounds in activism and all the things that you're working on besides Citizens Climate Lobby, I was hoping you could each tell us about 1 or 2 projects that you're working on right now, and if there's any ways for people to get involved with those, what are those? How could they find ways to get involved?
So I'm with Sunrise Movement, and in LA we have, I think, 2 main projects that are going on right now. The first is a project that's LA-based to get LA to basically a Green New Deal in LA, which involved, we had a campaign to stop 3 gas plants from being repowered by LADWP, and that part of it actually, finally a bit of good news, that plan actually was successful, and Mayor Garcetti announced last week that they will not be repowering those gas plants, and now we're continuing this fight though to, right now they are aiming to go to 100% renewables by 2045, and that is too late. We are trying to convince them we need this by 2030 at the latest. And so there's going to be a press conference this coming Tuesday. You can look into that. It's hosted also by Food and Water Watch. That's like one thing that can definitely be done right now. And if you reach out to us through our Facebook page or anything, you can get involved in that. The second thing is right now, you guys, many of you probably heard of the national push for a Green New Deal. And right now we are lobbying our representatives, we are lobbying our senators to co-sponsor this bill, or this resolution, before Mitch McConnell is forcing it to vote in the Senate in just a couple of days. And so if you can call your representatives, call your senators, anything you can do for that is super helpful, especially because the Green New Deal and the Carbon Dividend Act that CCL is pushing work together. These are things that can work together, and the more things we have pushing us towards green energy, the better. And so yeah, just reach out. We're on social media. We have an email. It's just sunrisemovementlosAngeles@gmail. So feel free to reach out or talk to me after this. And yeah.
One thing, Stand Delay, so Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling Los Angeles, we're trying to establish an ordinance in the city of Los Angeles to create a buffer zone between oil extraction and sensitive land. In that buffer zone, we want it to be 2,500 feet, and there's been studies that when you're 2,500 feet away, you won't get any of the health impacts from being so close to oil wells. And if we get that passed, when we get that passed, it would close about 86% of the oil wells in Los Angeles because of how close they are to homes and schools and parks and hospitals. So one thing you guys can definitely help is reach out to your local council members and ask them to sign on to that and ask for your support. And we also need volunteers. We need people to go to our marches. We need people to go to our city hall hearings, town hall meetings, and I'd be more than happy to give any of you guys information. You can just reach out after.
So a lot of the work that I have been doing, at least recently, has been more campus-based. So I'm a current student at USC, And we have had a couple of sustainability measures and plans that the Board of Trustees have passed and then not actually committed to. One of the main points is the reduction of single occupancy vehicles on campus. And one of the best ways to fix that would be to offer discounted or fully subsidized Metro passes to students and faculty. It's something that we've been working on for a good 2 years now. And something that would be really helpful whether you're an alum or not, because USC has tried to make such a huge commitment to the surrounding community in Los Angeles. We'll be doing letter writing campaigns and different kind of like petitions and marches as well to more broadly have the Board of Trustees and the greater administration as a whole actually commit to these sustainability measures. So that would be really helpful as well. And then to anyone doing field work as well, if you ever want to connect on trying to get your campaign to be as paperless and paper-free as possible. I know it's really difficult a lot of the time when you're doing canvassing and phone banking, but there's a lot of paper wasted. So that would be really helpful as well. So.
So at USC, especially with the organizations that we're a part of, we try to be proactive and reactive. So we proactively try to push for policies. We've met with the State Senator, Holly Mitchell's district director, to push for transit-oriented development around campus. But more than that, we especially like to be reactive, because especially with a lot of the stench coming out of Washington, D.C., we know there's always something on the agenda, whether it's the carnival circus of which nominee and former lobbyist is now up for the Department of Interior. So we always try to kind of call Congress and hold people accountable to that. And what's frustrating is sometimes students will come up with any variety of excuses to not do that. And so we're always trying to find ways to really cut to the heart of the issue and how to package things to make sure that people understand the severity of the issue. We have people that say that they're running to class, but they're kind of walking. People who say, oh, maybe later. But then we ask the question, but when's later? How long do we have? So we're always trying to figure out how to incorporate the urgency of the moment into that. We're always trying to figure out different ways that we can activate students around any kind of issue, whether it's state, county, local, national, any issue, any kind of representative. We'd love to have more information about what issue we can be incorporating USC students with, because we have students from every single state, which I think except for South Dakota. So any South Dakota issue, sorry about that. So we'll try to incorporate pretty much any issue across the state, across the world, to really make sure that we can activate every single student on our campus.
So Nalleli, as the youngest person on our panel, a high schooler who's already been involved in environmental activism for over 9 years, I was wondering if you could share a little bit more with us about how being a young person in environmental advocacy has both helped you and maybe proven challenging.
My favorite question. All right. I was extremely shy before I started my activism. I would even if we went to family events, I'd only talk to my mom. I'd never leave her side, and I mean never. So my activism, by having to share my story, having to go out, really put myself out there on the front lines to say, this is what's happening in our backyards, and it's time to change that. I went door to door knocking, I've been lobbying, and that has really showed me that I have a voice, and I have a voice that deserves to be heard, just as every single person in this world. And that has really taught me the importance of public speaking and about self-love and self-care and uplifting other people's voices, because it's such a scary thing to be up here and talk, be the only one talking. And one way it's challenged me, I miss a lot of school. I think the last time I checked, I've missed 23 days just this year. Yeah. I'm gonna get in trouble. Another thing is that I've missed a lot of school events. I've only been to 2 football games my entire 4 years of high school. I've missed 2 proms. I've missed all kinds of things because I know the importance of the work I'm doing, and I know that being at a conference or sharing my story will be more beneficial to not only my community, but ultimately the world, than having a picture of me at prom on my wall. And it's really difficult when you're an 18-year-old that wants to have that social life, but you have to know that what you're doing is not only helping you, but your community, and that's what's more important.
Now, Michaela, so you've told us a little bit about how you have a really specific interest in team building and coalition building. And I was wondering if you might be able to share any tips or tricks that you have or things that you found to really motivate young people in getting involved in environmental advocacy.
Yeah. So a lot of I started doing campaign work when I was 15 in high school because there were people running for Congress in my district, and the incumbent congressman had been there for almost 20 years and had made very little commitments to sustainable energy and to different like environmental initiatives in our district as well. And so I would posit that a lot of the time when movements don't have a lot of young people, it's really just a product of young people not knowing that they can be involved. And so, reaching out not only to local universities and community colleges, but also to high schools. Never underestimate the power of an offer of a letter of recommendation to a high schooler.
Yes.
It's really powerful. It's really good stuff.
Yeah.
But also, there are a lot of people who care, especially young people, because we are the rising generation and we will have to deal with so many of these issues. So, doing what you can to reach out, even, having members of your chapter or leadership going into local science classes and talking about, these are different things that are impacting our community and this is how you can get involved. Because a lot of the time the limiting factor isn't a lack of interest, it's a lack of understanding for how to get involved. So reaching out digitally is great, but also making sure that you follow up and have face-to-face interactions with these folks is really, really critical.
Now, Alec, you've worked on a lot of different things, not just environmental advocacy. One of your other big involvements on campus is with feeding the hungry. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the intersectionality of advocacy work and how you see the interplay between all the different work you've done.
Yeah, so intersectionality sounds like the Scrabble word of the day, but essentially it's just making sure that not only the right people are at the table, but that everyone is at the table, especially when we're talking about issues like the environment. It's not just folks whose passion is the environment. It's folks who care about environmental justice. It's folks who care about housing affordability and transit. So it's really making sure that we break down the barriers of not only who's interested in what, but which communities are effective. Because ultimately, this is an issue that we can't run from. We always hear about these stories about the super rich trying to have different layers in Utah to hide out when climate change create some kind of like asteroid, who knows what that's going to entail. But the rest of us, we're all going to be here, and we're dealing with the consequences in the here and now, especially for younger generations, and making sure we reach out to those young, diverse populations. We're going to be living through this for decades and decades, even if we get that far. So it's really making sure that it's not only diverse amongst ideas and ideals and policies and politics, but really making sure that people are diverse, and especially making sure that we have people represented of every generation, as all my fellow panelists can attest to.
And Natalie, you have really helped kick off the Sunrise movement here. You got involved right as it was starting. I remember when we spoke a little bit earlier, you were saying it was just over a month that this organization had even been started. So could you share with us a little bit more what it's like to be at the forefront of a brand new movement?
So Sunrise Movement in LA, we just hit 3 months like this week, I think. But the organization started in 2017 with a bunch of people from all over the climate movement, and they just sat down and they strategized for like a year to build the framework for this movement. And then after a little while, it just kind of took off and started spreading all over the country. And so I think for Sunrise specifically, I was helped a lot by the fact that we had that framework to use that they had built for us, and that allowed us to go and just take off. But even with that infrastructure, it has been just a complete whirlwind of just like every day, like every week I'm like, oh God, it's been only 1 week since like this happened. There's just so many things happening all the time. 3 months in, our Slack page has like 150 members, and it just keeps growing and growing, and there are more things happening, and it's awesome. But it's also like you need to be able to like take a step back and like look and be like, do we need to reorganize this? Like, how are we doing this? And it just goes very quickly. But I think it's very important to take advantage of the momentum that these movements have when they're this new, because like you have momentum and you got to just keep going because that's how we make progress. So yeah.
Great, and now we're going to take some audience questions. So if you have a question too, don't be shy about it. We've got note cards out there for you. So write your questions down on note cards and just kind of wave it, and one of our student volunteers will help get those questions up here. So one of the questions that we got from the audience was for any or all of you, what did you first read or view that got you going about climate change solutions?
Who wants to go? I'm going. All right. So I didn't read anything, or I lived the thing. So I grew up next to an oil well. I was 30 feet away from an oil well, to be exact. And the oil well is called Alanco, and they operate on land that's leased to them by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So we like to say we're fighting two monsters, the oil industry and the Archdiocese, but we're not attacking the faith. Like, that's not the thing. So I had the first-hand experience of getting sick from the toxic emissions exposed during oil extraction. So I got body spasms. I got to the point where I couldn't walk, heart palpitations. I had to use a heart monitor for several weeks, headaches, stomach pains. I have asthma now, and that's something I'm always going to have to live with. And unfortunately, I have a higher risk for developing cancer in the future. And there's a lot of other things I don't know if they'll pop up when I'm older, and that's something that's really scary because of where I had to grow up, because I had to live in an affordable housing building, because I come from a low-income family, a single mom, an immigrant mom, an immigrant father, and knowing that the oil industry does studies to see which communities are most vulnerable to not fight back because we don't have the proper access to education that tells us about our rights. So that's why I started to fight. And I've always been told, like, okay, you're only 9 years old, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, I don't know all the science behind it, and that's why we have scientists on our side. That's why we have PhD people and different things like that. But I know my story. I know my community story, and that's what I'm going to share. That's what's going to make a change to get people to resonate with us and to fight with us. And so that's why I started to fight.
Kind of going off that last point, something that really awakened me a lot more to especially the intersectionality of this issue, and especially how pressing it is seeing how many hundreds of thousands of Angelenos live within a football field away from a highway. And so when we take a look at like transit-oriented development, it's not just about making sure we reduce traffic gridlock. It's really making sure that we don't pollute people's lives and put them in positions where they're forced to live with pollution and have things like body spasms at the age of 9 years old. So it's really making sure we cultivate a society and have an urban planning infrastructure to make sure that we have a society that's conducive to the health and well-being of all people, not just sustainability.
All right, so we have this question that asked, what is your opinion on the role of nonviolent protest on public awareness of climate issues? And I also wanted to tie into that. We've gotten a couple questions about the student strikers for climate change, which, if anyone isn't aware of this, it's a movement that was started by Greta Thunberg. I might be pronouncing Thunberg, yeah, where students are taking off of school on Fridays or other days to protest the lack of government action on climate solutions.
Yeah, first, I see someone pointing out back there. So there is like the national student strike happening on March 15th. We have at least one here, and yeah, just spread the word about it. It's important for people to know about that happening. And yeah, again, people have been striking on Fridays for it. And for the thing about nonviolent civil disobedience, or like nonviolent protest, I think personally, from my experience, it absolutely has its place. It's how we get our attention from people. It's how we get, and the nonviolence is how we get people to join us. It's how we get the attention, and we don't turn people away. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all of activism. So much of activism And the more you become involved in this, the more you realize this. Those protests that you see on TV are such a tiny, tiny, tiny. For every protest like that happens, just planning the protest, there's probably like 20 hours of work going into it, and also like another 20, 50 more hours of work where we're in meetings with representatives, in meetings with this, because that is also super important. We need the public to become aware for the sake of getting more people into our movement. But once those people are in the movement, we need to be directly putting pressure on the people who can actually make these things get fixed.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think a lot of it is just making sure that your movement is exhaustive in what it does. And I do think that protests and marches and like student strikes are really good kind of like entries into a movement that are like, it feels like a low commitment when you're just attending, and then you can use that momentum to grow it in other ways and spaces as well. So completely agree.
Great. So the next question was, Michaela already shared with us some good tips about recruiting young people, but I was wondering if anyone else had any good tips about recruiting young people or getting young people motivated, and also an elaboration on the science class question. They wanted to know if you meant any specific level, like high school or college campuses, or any specific film or speaker recommendations.
Yeah. So I'm going to sit a little closer. Going off that, something that we did with a few of the congressional campaigns when we were recruiting like high school interns is we would go into like AP Gov and Econ and history classes to let people know about the different campaigns that were at their kind of like disposal for involvement and the different candidates and what they stood for. And something that we've similarly used in terms of environmental advocacy is going into AP environmental science classes and biology classes at local high schools as well, to let people know about different ways for involvement in their own communities and different organizations that they can reach out to and join. And yeah, so that's kind of that elaboration.
Great, thanks. And then did anyone else have any other tips on good ways to reach out to young people?
Small thing, stop having your meetings at like 6 on a Tuesday. We have homework, we have classes, we can't go. Weekends.
Yeah, or talking to students.
No.
Ooh.
All right. So we got 2 questions of this variety. I think this one says it pretty well. It says, I have the impression that many people your age are apathetic and don't register or vote. Is this correct? Or how can we get them engaged?
Right, so young people now, we are the largest generation, the largest voting bloc in this country. And so I think on face value, there seems to be a lot of apathy, but I think it's a lot of disillusionment and disengagement that's really been hammered home through a lot of the kind of messaging and the media that we've been seeing. So I think that's something that is really cool, especially with like the Sunrise Movement, a lot of these other youth-led movements, is showing that young people can have a concrete change. It's not just talking about ideas and ideologies, it's about putting policies into practice and demanding change in the here and now. So I think that when we really we move past the partisanship and start linking elections to issues instead of just people, I think that's really important. That's something we really tried to hone in on our campus for USC. But more than that, it's just unbelievably hard to vote as a USC and a college student, just in terms of all the dates and deadlines and registrations. We just gotta simplify that process and make it easier for students, make sure we have like universal voter registration, really making sure that we don't just demand things from students, is really making sure that we give them the opportunities to and create that cohesive environment for them to do it, because that's half the battle. And then the other half of the battle is really connecting it to people and showing them that A, they can make a difference, and B, that they should make a difference.
I guess another thing that I want to add to that is I don't think that it's that young people don't want to vote and that there's just they don't want to participate in this. I think at this point, a lot of the options, it's kind of you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do you want the Democrat who's not going to do anything about the environment or the Republican who's also not going to do anything about the environment. Like, you want someone who does something about the issues you care about, and lately a lot of the options, none of them do. So people don't vote because they're like, it doesn't even make a difference when I do it. And also, college campus voter suppression is a big, the 2016 elections, I got in line to vote at 6 p.m. thinking, okay, I'm gonna go, and then I'll go and I'll get dinner afterwards and whatever. By the time I got to vote 3.5 hours later, the election had been called. Yeah. So, like, making sure voting is accessible and making sure that the voting, there are candidates that catalyze people, that people want to go vote for. That's, I think, the two biggest things.
All right. If you had 1 minute to speak to Congress, what would you say?
Oh. I'd need more than a minute.
I can make it 3 words. Do your job.
He said it.
All right. I like it.
Also,
And then I'd follow up with a memo.
Yeah. Also, can you just, yeah, it's, do your job in a way that actually helps people.
I feel like we also need to remind them that we're the ones that put them in those seats and we can just as easily take them out. That we need to remind them that we're in charge of them, not vice versa.
All right, so a little bit of gear shifting here. So because we've talked a little bit about the role of media and like Slack and engagement with all of your movements, how do you keep up with the science and the political landscape when you're engaging in environmental issues and the overflow of information that can sometimes come from that?
As a Generation Z person, I'm a little late to the game, but I just got a Twitter. And I understand that there's certain constraints in terms of how many characters, in terms of certain people we can see, including presidents with their tweets, how limited they are. But I think it's really important because especially Twitter, it doesn't just give you the news, it gives you the responses that you want to see, because I think it's not only just about promoting the right information, it's about combating disinformation. And so we see a lot of, misleading tweets about actual climate change and actual climate policy, and it's very important to keep up on the news and to figure out the information and see who the people that we care about and trust, how they deflect that disinformation and give us the tools to be able to market that. Because we always talk about millennial attention spans, but let's be frank, everyone has the attention span of a fish. I think it's a goldfish, that's what the saying is. So I think it is important, without giving out too much detail and too much nuance, it's being able to have succinct ways of communicating with people and to be able to get them on board, not just with slogans and messages, but being able to make sure we can make the information accessible and concise, really to make sure that we get everyone across the board at least as an entry point, and really making sure we keep up with the day-to-day. It's not just annual reports, it's every single day uploading that news feed every single hour.
All right, so we had a couple questions also about whether or not there's a student CCL chapter at your school, and maybe if there is, if you could talk about how that chapter works. And if there isn't, would you be interested in starting one or helping someone start one at another university?
I don't think USC has one, but we actually have a really cool environmental student assembly, and Jacob over there, he's walking around, he's the assistant director, and they do a really cool thing which they bridge together all the different environmental organizations on campus. So they have about 12 member organizations, and they really try to coalesce them around these topics and engage in campus-wide discussions, whether that's promoting ethical and sustainable ways of eating, whether that's bringing in climate change activists. USC's bringing in John Kerry, for example, to talk about climate change in a few months. So I think that we would definitely benefit from a CCL chapter, but it's also really important that we have organizations like Environmental Student Assembly who can bring all these disparate environmental movements together around common issues.
All right, so this one asks, how do you address cynicism from people who treat young people as being naive and unaware of traditional paths to change?
Usually by explaining policy. Like, they're like, oh, well, how will you do this? And usually explaining the exact legislative pathway gets them to stop asking that, because they try to use it as a gotcha question, but like there's an actual answer, and they don't expect you to know it, but it's not actually that hard to know.
Anyone else?
I feel like, for me at least, I know that I still have a lot to learn, and I really appreciate any guidance in that matter, but I still understand things. I'm not like, you don't need to have to spell it out. I just need to be told how to do it, because I don't know how to do certain things. So just helping us and guiding us, not treating us like we're like two or something.
Also, in terms of what do we mean by traditional, you know, a lot of times we see like the new activism, we're just really trying to re-energize and channel that energy from the 1960s and 1970s. So I think that's what's traditional. I think we're trying to bring it back to the root of the movement and really trying to recatalyze that energy and activate people, no matter where they came from and no matter which method they want to use.
Yeah, that's going.
Yeah, let's hear it from the 1960s. Any 1970s folks out here? All right.
For the record, we're only talking about the tax policies and pretty much nothing else. Yeah, that's because like, and they're like, oh, like, well, like you guys don't know about traditional policy, and it's like, they're like, oh no, marginal tax rates, like that's never been done before, except for like all of the years where the U.S. economy was doing the best and we had the best social net and most of our history.
All right, so this one addresses, there's a video recently where a representative was talking to children activists and kind of being discouraging. So this person was asking what message you would send to any young people who feel discouraged in climate activism.
I feel like, since I sometimes feel like overwhelmed, because it is a really big thing that we're working for and we're fighting for, and just reminding yourselves that you can do it. It's never too early or too late to make a difference, and your voice deserves to be heard by every single person, and just reminding yourself that what you're doing is gonna make a change, and change is slow. Like, I've been working for 9 years and I'm only 18, and we've shut down wells, yeah, but we still have so many other wells to go. And just really reminding yourself that what you're doing isn't for you, but for a community and for your people and for entire generations, and not just this generation, but generations to come. And that's what we need to fight for.
All right, so these are some questions about the Sunrise Movement, which I know a few of you are involved in, as well as the Green New Deal. It asks, will the Sunrise Movement be getting involved in formulating specific legislative proposals to achieve the goals of the Green New Deal, and also how you might address people who might say that the Green New Deal is, some criticism says that it's vague, and how you address that?
So I mean, the thing about the Green New Deal right now that is in Congress is it's not a bill, it's a resolution. The point of a resolution is to give guidance on these things so that you can then pass the legislation. I think if these resolutions do pass, Sunrise will absolutely try to be involved in getting the actual like things within this bill going and with having the specifics. And I mean, like, yes, it's vague because of the fact that it is so urgent. We don't have the time to go and then get all these scientists privately. When we tried to get a select committee that would be able to do the research and then give us this policy, but because we don't have that, there's a lot of the resources in Congress to do that research are missing. But there's tons of like political research, like strategizing, stuff like that happening on Sunrise's side. And if this resolution passes, we also have, it's not this Green New Deal Select Committee, but there is the Climate Change Select Committee, who then, if this resolution passes and enforces these guidelines for Congress, they'll be able to go and commission scientists, all of these people. We've gotten offers from all types of like urban planning, public policy, like environmental groups, like green energy groups, just for free, willing to do this work. All we need is that Congress needs to be set off in that direction, and then we will be able to make those policies, if that answers the question.
Great. Okay, so this one says, if you could give your local CCL chapter orders, how would you tell us to help your group the most?
Something that I think would be really helpful, especially for environmental groups on campus and any kind of like politically engaged organizations, at least at USC's campus, something we would really benefit from is just like representatives from the chapter coming out to our different organizations' meetings and talking about your agendas and visions and game plans for the work that you want to do and telling us how to be involved. Because I know that, at least speaking to my own experience at USC and the different organizations I'm a part of, there is a lot of energy, but there's not a whole lot of guidance, especially in terms of getting connected to different organizations around USC. So many students at our campus are out of state. And so kind of offering these different pathways to involvement and to potentially leadership as well would be really, really critically helpful.
Going off what Michaela said in terms of different ways, our organization on campus has hosted Lorraine Lundquist, a CCL member who's running for city council. So we're really excited. Yeah, let's hear it for her. So we're super excited about her, trying to reach out to different groups. Like we're like a traditionally like political activism group, so really trying to focus on, we're very interested in campaigning. That is a great way to get involved and start changing the dialogue at the city council level. So trying to reach out to not only different environmental groups, but different groups who focus on different ways of advocating and doing activism and try to reach them where they are and give them tangible opportunities to get involved in whichever way that they're used to doing.
Presentation teams, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you. All right. This is kind of a fun question. How would I convince my congressman that the earth is not flat and that climate change is real?
This is a little bit of a pivot, but if you have to explain that to your congressman, I would just refocus your energy on getting someone else elected.
Yeah. Yeah, if any of you guys have an answer to that question, please let us know. We're still trying to figure it out.
I think Elon Musk is somewhere around here. If we can have like a SpaceX tour, take a little orbit around the globe. If anyone has any cheaper options, also please let us know.
All right. I was wondering if each of you could maybe just share a story about a challenge that you dealt with in your experience in activism. You all have done so many things, and it's not always been easy. So maybe if you could share just one challenge that you've overcome and how you got there.
I think for us, especially as an organization on a college campus, it's not just about building coalitions, it's not just about building consensus, it's about building communities. And that's how we're trying to create more sustainable change, because it's very frustrating to have 30 people in a room one night, 2 weeks later you're down to 8. So it's how do we keep up that momentum? How do we keep up that drive for change? And that's always been kind of a constant struggle for us. So in something that we figure out, it's all about building those relationships, building those communities, because we do the things that we do not only because we care about these things, it's because we care about the people who care. And those are the people that allow us and give us the energy to combat a lot of this stigma, a lot of these perceptions, a lot of this disempowering rhetoric, and really trying to push through that. And it's really helpful to have that team behind your back.
So for a lot of the initiatives that I've been working on, specifically at USC, one of the major challenges that I and many others have been facing is being the people who have to lobby the people in power. It's really frustrating when you know that the people who hold essentially the purse strings for such a wealthy university may not necessarily care about the same things that you care about. And so something that we've done to kind of respond to that is just hitting them where it hurts. So something that our environmental student assembly actually is working on is a board of trustees guide that essentially would track all of the different organizations that they have donated to. And then widely releasing that information. So I think, so something that's just been pretty pivotal is understanding who you are talking to and not losing that morale and that kind of, that that drive and that energy, because it can be very disillusioning in all aspects to know that the people who are the decision-making powers and bodies don't necessarily care, so making them.
For me, it's not necessarily an organizational one, but a personal one, if that's okay. So I've received a lot of hate because I'm so young and because I'm a person of color and things along those lines, but it's really hard when you're trying to create a change and you're not necessarily getting that support from different people. So that's something that I've always struggled with, and I know I'll always struggle with most likely, but just something that helps me is reminding myself why I fight. And I fight because I don't want any other person, any other kid to go through what I went through growing up. I fight so urban oil drilling is something kids read about in history books and think it's ridiculous that it was even happening, and it happened for so long. That's why I fight, and I don't know all the scientific names and all these fancy things because I am only a high school student, but like I said earlier, I know my story and my community story, and that's what I'm here to share.
For me, I think it's also kind of more of a personal one. It's just trying to find balance, trying to balance activism, trying to balance school, trying to balance like taking care of myself. And I'm even still like, I struggle to figure this out just because of like how strongly I feel about these things. The other day I was at school, I went to school on campus, spent 16 hours on campus doing work, came home, on the way home, decided to start brainstorming for a speech that then made me super anxious and I couldn't sleep the entire night, and then went to school for another 14 hours and then came, and it's just like endless like grinding at you, and it's super important to learn like you need to take care of yourself, you need to find balance. Sometimes you need to be able, even if you care so much about these things. And like for me, it's like I've needed to learn how to like delegate things to people and just to take a step back so that I can like sleep.
Yeah.
And then to turn that right back around, I was hoping each of you could share a moment of success, because you're all such successful examples.
Going in the same order?
I think part of the success is, you know, just building a community and building that coalition. So now, luckily, our organization has over 50 members, and so it's figuring out the sustainability of that organization, really making sure that we have opportunities for growth, and especially, you know, building that bench, figuring out like when we graduate, when we're gone, who's going to pick up the pieces, and really make sure we keep that going.
That's a fun question. I think for me, it's all about little victories, and a lot of those victories are just simply like communication and coalition building as well. And so I think for us, even when an initiative like may not go through, the relationships that you build along the way and the way that you expand the movement on the way to that result is still a win, even if there's a loss.
The victory I'm most proud of, and it's the one I've always like held super close to heart, is when I found out Alanco temporarily shut down. So they've been temporarily shut down for 5 years now, and I remember the exact day. I remember what I was eating when I got the news. It was caldo de papa, so potato soup, and it just reminded me that what I'm doing is making a change, and my work is paying off. My getting up at 3 a.m. to take air samples when I was 10 is making a change. That my door-to-door knocking after doing my science homework is making a change, and it makes me so happy.
So I know like I think one of our biggest victories that we've had just in our short time is recently was with the LADWP gas plants plan, where Garcetti, after like showing up at public comment meetings, like talking to these city council members, talking to the LADWP commissioners, we got the announcement that they were not going to be repowering these gas plants. They were going to cost the city $5 billion, and that $5 billion was going to go into clean energy infrastructure instead.
Right, and I want to thank everyone for asking so many great questions. We're going to take just 2 more that I have up here, and then we'll wrap up this panel. But second to last, this is a very school-related issue, so I thought it was appropriate and I wanted to get it in here. If a climate change denier were invited to speak at your campus, how would you react?
So something that we've been experiencing as well is just kind of different controversial speakers on campus and different ways to respond to that. What I would advocate for not only is some level of like explicit protest to that event, but also a counter event to kind of draw membership and viewership away from that initial event and towards yours to counter it. So bringing in like a CCL chapter or a representative who can speak to different kind of environmental initiatives or just kind of an environmental advocate as well. I think that there are a lot of different ways to kind of use your voice and kind of draw attention away from what could be kind of a disastrous and harmful event and towards yours instead.
I don't think my school would have that just because they're like so like into the environment, but if they did, I'd be obviously upset, but I'd also be excited because it'd give me that opportunity to like really target them and say, oh, you need to do your job, this and that, and it just give like, they can't run away from me at that point. Like they're there for an hour talking to me, like they're gonna put up with me for that hour.
All right, and our last question for you all. Assuming the best case scenario, what kind of future and world do you envision in the future, and if your effects are successful? So again, assuming the best case scenario, what kind of world do you envision in the future if your effects are successful?
For me, it's communities that are not only sustainable, but also communities that are equitable, because when we're tackling issues like climate change, it's not only for our collective survival, but it's also trying to make sure that we all can thrive, and it's trying to address a lot of these disparities and inequities that we see across this country, whether it's economic, social, cultural, whatnot. Really making sure that we rethink cities, rethink communities to make sure that they're more inclusive, whether that's making sure that people have transit-oriented development, whether that means that people have good paying jobs with the clean energy sector. It's really making sure that we rethink not only our climate change policies, but rethinking our society. And I think that's hopefully how the Green New Deal is not only changing policy, but changing the conversation and changing the bounds of what we not only expect, but also what we demand.
I think for me, the main issues that I would love to see a lot of improvement in, especially in the Los Angeles region, is there is not a lot of access to affordable and healthy food for a lot of families. So seeing a future where, every family, every child has access to, healthy and affordable food, access to public transit, access to clean air and green space, especially.
I have a list. So obviously 100% clean, renewable energy, a pathway from schools to schools, not schools to prison, healthcare for everybody and affordable healthcare, access to affordable housing, no homeless people, just, oh my God, I can go on and on. But just really a more inclusive and safer world for everybody.
Yeah, they've covered a lot of aspects of it. For me, I think it's super important in any transition to basically reducing emissions. I think it's super important to consider the people who've been affected by oil drilling and carbon emissions and stuff like that before. We can't do try to copy France and just aggressively increase the price of gas so that people will buy electric cars and not subsidize people buying those electric cars. We can't make our public transit lines lead to eminent domain, evicting people of color in poor neighborhoods who can't afford to live somewhere else. We need to use this as an opportunity to increase the wealth of our country and then distribute that wealth to the people who need it the most, instead of just making people get richer and richer. And for me, it's using this transition to bring about more equality and not just a decrease in emissions.
All All right, and to wrap up here, we got a lot of great comments too. Thank you for the comment about intersectionality, and this one is my favorite. It says, I am struck by how amazing and intelligent you all are. Keep it up and thank you. And I think that that is exactly my message to this panel today. So after this panel, if you're looking to connect with any of them, from your right to left, we've got Alec, Michaela, Nalleli, and Natalie. So please do reach out to them if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone.
Sit back down.